Hi, I'm Taylor Davis, and this is Alex McIntosh. We are so excited that you're joining us today for the Sales and Retention Prediction webinar for Revenue Cycle. So when we talk about sales and revenue cycle, this has been a really hot area that we've seen over the last couple of years. So this is an interesting conversation. There are some markets that are not quite as hot, but this has been a really hot area.
Yeah, we've seen a ton of interest from private equity firms, from merger, acquisition, and just a lot of provider interest in this market.
And I should give you a little bit of background. So I have the statistics background, if you've seen the other video, in terms of this model and things that are wrong with it, partly my fault for sure. And Alex McIntosh is our guru, one of our analysts who's been here at class for a good number of years and really understands the revenue cycle space in great detail. And we're so excited and grateful to have you here with us. So thank you, Alex. Yeah. So before we jump in, let's talk a little bit about this model. And then I'll start peppering Alex with some questions here about revenue cycle and what does this mean. So a few common points of understanding as we look at this model. First, it's really important to know that statistical model predictions are not going to be perfect. And if you've done any prediction models, you just know that they're going to come up with some things that are not always perfect. However, this model was built so that it gives us insights as to why it's predicting what it's predicting. And those insights can be really, really helpful. However, if a product has unique characteristics, such as a unique, a merger, an acquisition that's recently happened, or a unique niche in the market, or a unique customer type, or unique functionality, those predictions will tend to be a little bit poor. And maybe the other thing that we should say before we jump in, and we're going to describe the model a little bit more, but we should also note we're about to go through a whole bunch of market segments here. I think it's about 10. And so we're going to go fairly quickly as we buzz through these market segments today, right?
Yep.
So now let's just talk about how the model works. I want to give a little bit of intuition here. And there's been a lot said about Net Promoter. Would customers recommend a product or not? Class has found, and this model is finding, that it's not just whether customers recommend or not, it's why they recommend is really critical in terms of knowing whether or not current customers are going to add energy such that potential customers turn their heads and say, yes, that's where I want to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you think about this, an example that you could think about is movies. And so if I go to you, Alex, and I'm asking you about a movie that I want to see or that I'm interested in, I'm not just looking for whether you liked it or not. That's a valuable piece of information. But I'm also wondering, why did you like that movie? Mm-hmm. And anyway, so I may come to you and say, hey, you know that movie that's out? Hey, have you seen it? Did you like that movie? And Alex may say, hey, I loved it, right? But the conversation never stops here, right? You always ask, well, what did you like about it? And then you may say, hey, here's what I liked. It was super creative. The script was really creative. There's some characters that were really funny. And then I map that to what I was looking for in a movie. And I think, oh yeah, maybe I am interested in this also. So when it comes to a customer referral, the why matters just as much or more than the whether you recommend it or not, right?
Absolutely.
And so this model works to take that into account. We use something called rank. And at first when you look at it, it makes people kind of turn a little sideways. They're like, well, what do you mean? Well, we take all of the 16 rating questions and we put them from high to low here. And instead of looking at the actual rating scores that customers give, we say, well, the lowest rated question is a rank of 1. So of all the different areas, it's the lowest satisfaction. The highest rated is a rank of 15. We don't rank overall satisfaction so that we have continuity with how we do the class fingerprint. And so it goes to say if somebody is recommending their current vendor, they likely have a high class score. And then why they're recommending is usually the questions with a high rank. So in this case, quality of phone and web support is towards the top of this list. You would assume that customers, as they're giving a recommendation for their current vendor, are saying, yeah, they're really good. They have great support. And so you look at all these different areas, from implementation to support to integration to product to development to executive partnership, and you say, which of these Does it matter? If some of these questions are relatively high or relatively low, even if they have the same class score, does that change what we see the next year in terms of sales and retention? And the answer is yes. If you, the model, as we shared on the first slide, there's a lot here. And if you'd like to know more about the model, there's a whole webinar where we go through this. But there's some lines of demarcation. So when we see some questions above a certain threshold, we tend to see a significant jump in sales and retention. And for likely to recommend, which is really a question asking about, hey, is this a market leading product compared to everything else that you know out there? Is this the market leader? When the rank for that is a 14 or a 15, we tend to see really high sales, really high retention. You can see the other questions here. Delivery of new technology is really an innovation question. Supports integration goals is an integration question. Executive involvement is an executive partnership question. And then forecasted overall satisfaction is an optimism question. And these are 5 things that we can tell that current customers are listening for from, potential customers are listening for from potential customers when they're having conversations and getting recommendations. And when these are high, we tend to see higher sales and higher retention. And one other thing to mention is that there's some questions like delivery of new technology tends to have a lower rank just generally. So when that gets above a 7, we actually consider that pretty high. Whereas maybe a likely to recommend or a forecasted overall satisfaction, we tend to consider those very high when they're at a 14 or a 15. So anything that I missed as we walk through this, Alex?
No, I think you hit it. From what we're seeing in the data, this makes sense. And I think I'm looking forward to jumping into the data.
Okay. Well, let's jump in as we talk revenue cycle. The core of revenue cycle is obviously the patient accounting and patient management system, right? Everything else plugs in or has to play nice with that. And increasingly over the last decade, we've seen that these systems are mostly sold with the enterprise EHR, right? And so do we see anything here when we look at the sales predictions in this space? Does it look different than what we see on the EHR side?
No, it maps pretty closely to what we see in the EHR side. Like you said, Taylor, when hospitals or IDNs make these choices to bring in an enterprise system, they're not picking and choosing a clinical system on one side and a different financial system on the other side. So it's really that tight integrated enterprise solution that we're seeing. So market share tends to map to what we see on the inpatient side.
Okay. Now, we did see on the inpatient side, we saw Cerner coming in a little bit lower as far as their sales prediction. However, when it comes to patient accounting, you can tell sort of what is the tail and what is the dog in terms of what wags which, right? And the EHR generally is the dog and patient accounting is generally the tail, right? And so some of what we're seeing here with Cerner is that high prediction if you're a Cerner customer, right? And so this piece, however, when we look at the satisfaction and some of the challenges, it's not that the product itself is driving forward. It's just that if a customer is going down the EHR route, then they tend to say, hey, this makes a lot of sense for us to adopt this, right?
Yeah, we see this all the time. And with the patient accounting solution, that's brought in on top of the clinical piece. And yeah, absolutely. It's really the clinical piece that is the dog in this analogy.
Yes, exactly. And one thing really to take a look at that's interesting is the question likely to recommend. It's the strongest indicator of sales and retention success of all the different questions that we're looking at. So if you only look at one, you want to look at that. And so it's interesting, you have Meditech and Epic, they have very high likely to recommend at an 11, 14, 15. And then you have CPSI and Cerner with a 1 and a 2. So there's really a signal there from customers of, hey, we believe we're on a premier or one of the premier products in the market. With an Epic and a Meditech, a Cerner or a CPSI, customers are indicating, hey, we really feel like we're on a market lagging product. And this is a challenge for us. Is that similar to what we're hearing in the customer comments?
We hear that all the time with customers. We've heard it now for a number of years. If we look at the retention, what's really interesting, what sets CPSI apart from Cerner, or rather Cerner apart from CPSI, is there's a lot of hope with Cerner. So if we look at the forecasted overall satisfaction, that rate's fairly high for Cerner, fairly low for CPSI. And we've heard a lot of, like I said, hope from Cerner customers, especially with the announcement of Revelate and what that might do for patient accounting and revenue cycle in the future. Customers are hopeful, but they're in kind of a wait and see pattern at the moment.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Let's keep jumping. We can only spend a few minutes on each area. So let's talk about charge master management. This is a space where we have 2 very high satisfaction vendors. very similar class scores. They kind of are always, you could say,
neck and neck.
Yeah, they're neck and neck when it comes to best in class. However, very different sales predictions. So walk us through, why do we see, in this case, we see Craneware with a much lower sales prediction than what we see with Vitalware, and very interested to hear the differences as to why that is.
Yeah, and when we look at the data and we dive into customer commentary and what they're saying in the rank order, we see when we look at Craneware, customers tend to talk about the relationship, the touch points, a lot more than with Vitalware. They tend to talk about Vitalware in terms of their technology that they're able to develop and to drive, and their forward-looking nature and being innovative in the market.
So, as we look at these two, and we see both of these vendors absolutely getting some sales, but if I'm Craneware, I may be looking at this and saying, hey, how do I do better as far as delivery of new technology, right? And maybe I'm innovating and I'm doing some things, but how do I bring my customers along on that journey, right? And if I'm Vitalware, I may be looking and saying, hey, how do I do a better job of creating strong executive partnerships with my customers? So when you start looking at the different ranks of the different questions, customers are recommending, clearly both of these solutions are being recommended, but they're being recommended for very, very different reasons, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we look at retention, there's some difference here, right? But we see, average to high retention for both of these, which makes sense given the high satisfaction, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've heard that difference. And with Craneware coming in with a rank of 1 for supports integration goals, there's obviously some more challenges that they're experiencing with that than with Vitalware that's doing much stronger at an 11 overall.
Okay, great. Well, let's jump over to Claims and Clearinghouse. This is almost nobody goes in contract for a clearinghouse. And I know that we're having some conversations about how we measure this market, but you do see that that Waystar is possibly creating some disruption in this market. Does the model show that also?
Yeah, and this is a market where you go back a couple of years and you have a very different vendor set in there.
Exactly.
And it has changed, and Waystar has come onto the scene and made some big strides here. Really, with they're seen in the market as being a little bit more innovative, very likely to recommend their customers. When we talk to them, talk very highly about them, and they're likely to recommend, I think, is at the very top here, 15 out of 15. Additionally, they've done okay with their executive involvement. There could be a little bit of improvement done there, but not terribly overall. And Availity is, for the most part, in the same boat. A lot of their customers recommend them very, very highly for the services they offer. Not as high for delivery of new technology. It doesn't rank as high. Their scores are a bit lower overall, but still seen as kind of a market leader in Claims and Clearinghouse.
Okay, and this is more in some of the ambulatory spaces, and there's
Correct.
a number of players that are missing. Either we don't have enough surveys here for them, and the inpatient space is obviously a very different footprint in terms of the market share that we see. But with these 3 players, all of them have average to high retention, possibly some turnover with Athena, and but anything else that we see here to call out in terms of what we can expect in this market going forward?
We don't see a ton of turnover in this market. Like you said to begin with, we don't see a lot of providers going out there saying, hey, I need a new Claims and Clearinghouse vendor because my solution's underperforming. This market is very well established. These systems tend to perform fairly strongly overall, and they're often tightly integrated with the EMR PM solution that is brought into the ambulatory clinic.
Okay, that's great. Well, let's jump over to claims management. I mean, this is another kind of workhorse area of revenue cycle, right? There's so much to do, and as you have this arms race between payers and providers, it just continues to be something that really has to function really well. Are we seeing any disruptions possibly in this market?
Yeah, it's obviously a very high scoring market overall.
Yep.
Anything that helps with denials and handling claims is really important to provider organizations. And we've seen kind of Experian have the best overall offering here, and we expect to see high sales going forward with them, and the model shows that as well. In addition, SSI Group has come onto the scene, and they're really known as kind of the innovator in the market, and doing really well there, and heard some really honestly great things about them. And these vendors both, along with Waystar, have a very high likely to recommend. Their customers talk about them all the time. They're talking about them to their friends and peers and sharing the good things that they're doing.
So Alex, this is a market that we've seen. KLAS hasn't done a report in this market in a number of years. I know that's changing. This is an area where we're probably going to be putting some focus here in the future and looking. But there's a number of dynamics here when you look at integration, when you look at Quadax, Waystar, Experian, all having the highest likely to recommend ranks. So customers more likely to say, hey, we feel like we're partnering. Anyway, there's some dynamics here that we want to be digging into in the next few years. Let me ask you here: in Thrive and Change Healthcare, lowest predicted retention. What are we? Why is that? What are we seeing from those two?
With these two vendors, you've seen a number of changes in the market in terms of their company structure, in terms of mergers, acquisitions, things like that. And it's left some uncertainty among their customer base as to where this is really kind of going. And during that time, these vendors haven't been necessarily sharing their roadmap for the future, because the future is kind of up in the air right now. And it depends on what happens once the dust settles from these mergers, acquisitions, and company splits.
And I know from talking to some Thrive customers, some of them have expressed, hey, we don't feel like we've seen changes in quite a while. So you have that delivery of new technology rank at a 1, definitely a concern that we're hearing from some. And also Quadax is an interesting example. This is not all of these vendors are necessarily playing to the same size of organizations,
Absolutely.
right? So this is a vendor that tends to be in smaller organizations and some ambulatory, right? So there's some differences there, right? So let's talk about clinical documentation integrity. This is an interesting market. I know, we've heard from some from some providers as they're going out and making decisions. They said, well, if we don't include 3M and Compass, then everybody's going to say that we didn't do a good job. I mean, they are the behemoth in this market,
they
right?
are.
And anyway, so as we look at this market, you also have Nuance that plays here. What are some of the trends that we're seeing here in CDI?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been on those conversations with providers that said, hey, if I don't bring 3M into the RFP, then I'm going to look silly. So they are brought in and considered most often in this market. And they are the behemoth because they have the market share. And we see a lot of considerations for 3M, and because of their place within revenue cycle and offering multiple solutions across revenue cycle, they have very strong integration overall, and that shows here with the drivers for sales prediction slide.
A 14 compared to everyone else is either a 1, 2. I guess you have 3M and Modal at an 11, but again, 3M, is there's a big difference between everyone else on that integration side, right?
And it's really that footprint that they already have established in revenue cycle that really drives this to be a very high sales prediction, because providers are bringing them in because it already integrates, and it integrates well with their existing 3M solutions. Interesting.
So we don't see likely a lot of change in this market.
Not a lot of change, not a lot of movement, no.
Yes, okay. And then when it comes to retention, we expect 3M to continue to hold on to most of their customers. So there's lots of good things going on there, but expect them to continue to hold on to customers and be competitive in any new deals that come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say real quickly, you also have Nuance on here, and this is one of those unique products in the market.
Okay.
That I think that the model doesn't necessarily do justice, because you have their CDI product, and you also have their new CDE1 product. And we're seeing customers migrate from the Nuance CDI product to the CDE1 product as well, which isn't represented here.
Okay.
And it because of the uniqueness and the customers migrating from one product to the next, it shows low retention, but I'm not sure that the model completely takes into account what's going on here.
Absolutely. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Let's look over at computer-assisted coding. Some of the very same players, right?
Yeah.
So and what do we see here in this market? Again, 3M, higher predicted sales, right?
Yeah, and we hear the same thing, that if 3M isn't brought into the deal, then the CIO or whoever is made to look silly for not bringing 3M into the market. So they're often considered. And if you look here, the scores are fairly high for customers like Dolby. Scores a 91 overall, but if we look at their data and look what's really going on here, they're scoring high for a lot of those touch metrics. You look at the the just general, does this vendor provide the support that I need? Are they being proactive?
And not necessarily executive involvement. Not necessarily that executive partnership.
Correct.
But some of the support, just phone and web support.
Yeah, the phone and web
areas.
support, the table stakes, the lower end of the support.
Okay.
So they're not being as necessarily innovative or forward thinking with their customers and engaging in those deep conversations about strategy and developing the technology.
Oh, that's very interesting. And so as you look here, the Dolby, high likely to recommend. Again, Dolby though is playing in some different organizations than what we're seeing for an Optum and definitely for a 3M, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Tends to be smaller organizations overall.
Okay. And then when it comes to retention, there is possibly some concerns here as far as retention for a 3M compared to a Dolby or Optum, is what the model is predicting. Do we think does the model possibly have it right, or is there any concerns there?
Like you said when we introduced this segment, we don't see a lot of movement in this segment overall. 3M is that 500-pound gorilla in the room. They're often not replaced in deals, but when considerations happen, they are brought into those deals. So the model may not be necessarily perfect here in predicting future retention because you don't see a lot of movement in this market segment.
Okay. And now let's talk about an area that has very low energy. So contract management, really quite low energy, and anything that we're seeing in the contract management space.
What's really, I actually think this is a really interesting segment because you have two vendors here that are very, very different. You have you have Experian, you have nThrive, and there's currently a 30-point difference in overall satisfaction between the two.
Okay.
For very strong reasons.
Yes.
Overall. And if we pull up the next slide here, you can see that Experian has customers that are very satisfied. They're recommending that solution very, very strongly. They're being very vocal about it. Integration also very strong with Experian, not necessarily as strong with nThrive. And like you had alluded to earlier, in one of the other market segments, nThrive's delivery of new technology has fallen off because the executive involvement has also kind of disappeared for the most part with their customers, and the customers are kind of left wanting more of that strategy, more of that involvement, more of that roadmap from nThrive, and they're just not getting it.
It's interesting as we look at all these different areas. nThrive is one vendor that has fairly low predictions in pretty much every area, right? And that maps to some of the conversations. So as we've talked to some vendors I know, and I won't mention anybody in particular, but I have heard from vendors saying, we have a target on nThrive customers right now. We know that there's a lot of change going on. We know that they're not blazing a path forward. We know that they're not connecting very well to the market. And when we look at organizations who possibly might move, those are some of the first customers that we go knocking to. And that's a lot of what we're seeing here too, right?
Yeah, and we've had conversations with a number of their providers, their clients over the past year or so that have really seen a change in nThrive since nThrive decided to split off the services from the software, and they're not really sure where the direction of the company is going.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about Experian in contract management, let's jump over and talk about patient access. If I rewind 5 years ago, Experian was the dominant force in patient access. So I remember talking to customers who said, really, there's nobody else that we can go to that has the same sort of functionality as Experian, and their prices are higher, but we just have to pay it. We just have to do this. Today, that market has changed a lot, and the model is not predicting the same sort of energy for Experian. Is that something that we're also seeing? Are we seeing them have a lot less energy in the market?
We're definitely hearing about it. We're hearing about the newer entrants, Pelitos, SSI, that are coming into the market segment with far more energy. You have the conversations with Experian customers and then Pelitos or SSI customers, and there's definitely a difference in tone that their customers have. They're much more excited. They're much more engaged by the vendor, and they have a better sense on where the vendor plans on taking this product in the future and the roadmap going forward. So they're much more likely to recommend and say great things about the technology in general.
And you've got, especially with Pelitos and Waystar, you've got a couple vendors that are in many ways, they're swimming upstream, right? Yeah. So if we're likely to see a win from Experian, it's more likely some of these large organizations, let's say possibly a large organization who's just contracted with Epic, a lot more likely to see a win on the Experian side Pelletas on Waystar coming up in size in terms of the deals that they're winning, right?
Absolutely. They both started off in the smaller organizations, and we've seen them swim upstream and gather more and more momentum. They're obviously not the 500-pound gorilla in the room. I think they would both like to be that. But it'll be really interesting to see this market evolve with these vendors that have been successful in smaller organizations and whether they can replicate that success as they move upstream.
Okay. Well, and then as we look at retention predictions, you've got low retention predictions for Change Healthcare. Let's talk a little bit about where do we see change. Change, an organization seeing lots and lots of change, right? And so you still have the Optum merger possibly on the table. You've just got a lot of things out there that are a concern for some customers, and we are hearing that, right? Just like what we're seeing in the model.
Yeah, we've absolutely heard the concern with the Optum deal, and they don't really know what the future is going to hold. They don't know where this product is going, how it's going to be developed, and Change honestly has not done very well in communicating that roadmap to their customers. So when we talk to their customers, they frankly tell us that they really don't know where the product is going and what the plans are for it moving forward.
Okay, and I know that in some of these deals you can't communicate, so it gets really, really tough. But their customers are feeling like they are in limbo right now,
Yeah.
and that's being reflected in terms of retention and sales in what we're seeing. Okay, let's talk about a newer area that is high energy, lots of deals that are happening, lots of talk. So patient financial engagement, really critical. And what are we seeing in this space?
Yeah, whenever we talk to larger organizations, we hear about patient financial engagement. And if you go on Google and look at the news happening in revenue cycle, and there are mergers happening all the time, acquisitions happening, we see private equity flowing into this segment, and we see EMR vendors also investing large sums of money into developing their own internal systems. So this is a very high energy segment that has a lot of potential, and we should see a lot of sales from a couple of vendors in particular. We see a lot of things happening with the current product is now Waystar, now that Waystar has acquired PatientCo.
Yep.
We expect to see very high sales from them. Their customers, when we talk to them, are very ecstatic about the product. No one that we've talked to says that they have plans on leaving or anything like that. And these vendors are really well known. Both Waystar, Cedar, RevSpring are really well known for how well they are communicating kind of the future of these products and the potential tangible outcomes that can come from these.
And these companies, in terms of where they came from, even if they've been recently acquired, they come from fairly different backgrounds, and which is really interesting to watch, and these different backgrounds where they come from. As we look at likely to recommend, again, that most important indicator, you have Waystar and Cedar with likely to recommend at a 15. So customers saying, hey, we really feel like we're partnered with the premier organization. RevSpring at an 11, which is good. And then you have Flywire with a 7. So what are we seeing differently with Flywire? Also a lower projected sales overall.
Flywire has been really interesting. They're one of the companies that went public in this space, so one of those that's experiencing a lot of change. And they haven't been very good at communicating to their customers how they're going to develop this product going forward. So the delivery of new technology ranks, I believe it's last overall in terms of their rank, because the customers don't know where this product is going necessarily. And taking a step back, looking at RevSpring is one of those unique products in this model that doesn't account for the newer platform. So RevSpring has recently introduced their Persona Pay solution, and we're seeing customers migrate from the old solution to the new solution without going to any other vendors, but that migration is happening, which makes them a little unique in this market.
Okay, and we see that on the retention side, possibly some turnover. Not that any of these vendors today have a huge customer base, right? But they're growing quickly, and so we see possibly some turnover there. Anyway, a lot of the let me just ask real quick on the Waystar side, highest rank for supports integration goals, really critical in this space, right? So integration is going to be, and will continue to be a significant differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely. With this segment, I mean, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir, but if the patient's data doesn't flow over correctly, then it renders the entire system obsolete. That data has to be perfect in order to really drive those tangible patient outcomes and tangible financial outcomes for the patient so that they can pay their bill they can pay the correct amount, they can understand it, and they can really make a difference in affecting the provider's revenue cycle for the better.
Okay, this has been so helpful, Alex. I've learned a lot from you as we walk through this. Thank you so much. Just a reminder for everyone who's joined us on the webinar: if you have any additional questions, please send them through the chat functionality. We're excited to answer those. And as you have additional questions in the future, please pull us in. We're so excited to continue to do this dialogue. As you can tell, Alex has a lot here that he could say, and we'd be excited to go in and talk about a lot of what we're seeing in all these different areas. So we're so glad that you could join us. Thank you so much, and continue to bring questions as we learn from this model, and especially the voice of customers going forward.
Thank you.